War is supposed to be about honor, duty, service. But what happens when the soldiers themselves become the criminals? Tonight we're looking at 5 cases where the uniform wasn't a symbol of protection. It was a mask for something much darker. From a decorated U.S. sergeant who turned into an international hitman, to a young Russian soldier who became the first convicted war criminal in the Ukraine conflict, to generals and spies who sold out their own countries. These are 5 soldiers whose crimes shocked the world and proved that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is wearing your own flag. Let's begin.
Joseph Hunter was exactly the kind of man you'd want on your side in a war. A U.S. Army Sergeant First Class, more than 20 years in uniform, elite training, combat experience, respected by those who served with him. But when he left the military, his skills didn't disappear. They got repurposed, not for defense, for murder. After retiring from the Army in the 2000s, Hunter didn't settle into a quiet life. He drifted into private security work overseas, then further into the shadows. Soon, he wasn't just guarding people, he was working with drug traffickers and criminal networks. And then he crossed the line fully. Hunter began recruiting other ex-military men, building a small team of mercenaries. They offered a menu of services: protection for drug shipments, kidnappings, contract killings. They were disciplined, professional, and willing to kill for money. Hunter became known in the underworld as Rambo, a soldier without a country, a gun for hire. By 2013, the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration had taken notice. Agents set up an elaborate sting posing as a Colombian cartel. The fake job? Murder a DEA agent in Liberia and carry out additional hits for the cartel. Hunter and his crew believed it was all real. They traveled overseas, prepared to execute the mission. But their clients weren't drug lords. They were undercover federal agents. Hunter and his men were arrested before they could pull the trigger. Extradited to the United States, Hunter faced a mountain of evidence: years of murder-for-hire plots, offers of assassination services to traffickers, plans for killings in multiple countries. Prosecutors painted him as the mastermind of a freelance assassination squad, a man who took everything the Army had taught him and sold it to the highest bidder. In 2019, in a New York federal courtroom, Joseph Rambo Hunter was sentenced to life in prison. His accomplices received long sentences as well. He once swore an oath to defend his country. In the end, he built a business around killing for cash.
February 2022. Russia invades Ukraine. Columns of tanks and armored vehicles pour across the border. Villages and small towns become war zones overnight. Among the soldiers, 21-year-old Russian tank commander Vadim Shishimarin. Within weeks, his name would make global headlines, not as a hero, but as the first Russian soldier convicted of a war crime in the conflict. Shishimarin's unit, part of the 4th Guards Tank Division, came under attack in the Sumy region of northeastern Ukraine. The column was hit, vehicles destroyed, survivors scattered. Shishimarin and several other soldiers hijacked a civilian car, a blue Volkswagen, trying to escape Ukrainian fire. As they drove through the small village of Chupahaevka, they saw a man on a bicycle, 62-year-old Oleksandr Shelipov. He was unarmed, riding slowly, talking on his phone. Inside the car, one of the Russian soldiers gave an order: shoot him. Shishimarin hesitated, then obeyed. From the passenger seat, he raised his AK-74, pointed it through the open window, and fired. Shelipov was hit in the head and died on the roadside. Not long after, Ukrainian forces captured Shishimarin. Instead of disappearing into the chaos of war, he was put on trial while the conflict still raged. In May 2022, in the Kiev courtroom, he became the first Russian soldier tried for war crimes during the invasion. The charges: violating the laws and customs of war, premeditated murder. Shishimaran admitted to shooting the civilian, but said he was following orders and feared disobeying. Prosecutors argued the victim was clearly a civilian. He posed no threat. Following an illegal order doesn't excuse a war crime. The court agreed. He was found guilty and initially sentenced to life in prison. Later, an appeals court reduced the sentence to 15 years, citing his age, his cooperation, and the pressure he was under. Even so, Vadim Shishimaran's case became a symbol of how quickly a young soldier's split-second decision can become a crime, and of Ukraine's message that war is not a free pass for murder.
In the British Army, Daniel Khalif's job was built on trust. He served in the Royal Corps of Signals, the branch responsible for military communications and sensitive information. He was trained, vetted, trusted, but for more than 2 years, prosecutors say, he was living a double life. Behind the uniform, Daniel Khalif was passing sensitive military secrets to agents of Iran. He had access to communications protocols, security information, intelligence relevant to the UK's defenses. Instead of safeguarding it, he allegedly sent it to a foreign power. When British authorities uncovered the leak, they arrested him and placed him in military custody at Woolwich Barracks in London, awaiting trial for espionage. Then things got even more dramatic. Khalif escaped. He exploited security lapses and slipped away from custody, triggering a nationwide manhunt. For days, news outlets across the UK showed his face. Police warned the public to stay alert. Roadblocks, surveillance, and special teams searched London and beyond. Eventually, Khalif was recaptured and moved to a more secure facility. This time, he wouldn't be getting out. In court, prosecutors laid out a 2-year pattern of passing classified material to Iran, the deliberate nature of his actions, and the additional danger posed by his escape. In 2023, he was convicted of espionage and related offenses. His sentence? 14 years and 3 months in prison. The Daniel Khalif case became a stark reminder that some of the biggest threats don't come from the outside the system. They come from the insiders who decide to turn.
For decades, Guo Baqiang was one of the most powerful men in China's military. As vice chairman of the Central Military Commission, he sat near the top of the entire People's Liberation Army, PLA. He helped decide promotions, assignments, the careers of thousands of officers. His word could make or break a general. But behind the formal meetings and the strict uniforms, Guo was running something else, a massive bribery operation. Officers who wanted promotions or key positions learned quickly. If you wanted to move up, you paid. Cash, gifts, lavish favors. In exchange, Guo used his influence to push careers forward. Over the years, the amounts were huge. The network of corruption was deep. When China launched an aggressive anti-corruption campaign, investigators began looking at the military's top ranks. Guo, once thought untouchable, was suddenly in the crosshairs. They traced money flows, property, testimony from officers who admitted paying bribes. The image of a loyal, disciplined commander collapsed. Guo Baqiang was formally charged with corruption and bribery. In a rare and highly public trial, prosecutors detailed how he had sold promotions, manipulated the chain of command, and turned the honor of military service into a marketplace. He was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. All of his illegal gains were confiscated. For China, the case was historic. A top general brought down by his own greed, a signal that no rank was too high to be investigated. For the PLA, it was a warning. Even at the very top, corruption can end in a cell.
March 12, 2006, in a small farming village south of Baghdad, Iraq.
By that time, war had become a tragic part of everyday life. Checkpoints, patrols, distant gunfire. But what happened on that day was not the act of insurgents. It was carried out by soldiers who were supposed to protect the people. 4 men from the 101st Airborne Division, Specialist James Barker, Sergeant Paul Cortez, Private Stephen Dale Green, Private First Class Jesse Spielman. They had been watching a local family, the Al-Janabis, a father, a mother, and 2 daughters. One of the girls, Adre, was just 14 years old. What began as disturbing talk among bored, angry soldiers turned into a horrendous plan. They left their assigned post without authorization and approached the family home. Jesse Spielman didn't fire the shots. He didn't directly harm anyone, but he wasn't innocent. He acted as a lookout, helped with the break-in, and ensured no one interrupted what the others were about to do. Inside that house, the family suffered a terrible crime. The parents and the younger daughter were killed, and Adre, only 14, was assaulted and later died. The bodies were later burned in an attempt to hide what had happened. At first, the attack was blamed on insurgents, but rumors spread inside the unit. One soldier, unable to live with the guilt, came forward. Investigators began to piece together the timeline, the missing weapons, the burned remains, and confessions. Everything pointed back to those 4 soldiers. When Jesse Spielman was brought before a military court in 2007, his defense argued that he was only a follower, that he hadn't pulled the trigger and hadn't committed the assault himself. But under military law, being the lookout and assisting in the plan did not absolve him. His presence and actions made the crime possible. The jury found him guilty. He was sentenced to 110 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 10. The incident, later known as the Mahmoudiya massacre, remains one of the darkest and most shameful chapters of the Iraq War, and the name Jesse Spielman will forever be associated with it, not because he fired the shots, but because he helped make the crime possible.
These 5 cases have one thing in common. Every man in these stories once wore a uniform. They were trained, trusted, armed by their countries. Joseph Hunter turned his skills into a global hit squad. Vadim Shishimaran pulled the trigger on an unarmed civilian in a war zone. Daniel Khalif sold secrets and ran. Guo Bokshong sold promotions and poisoned an entire chain of command. And Jesse Spielman didn't pull the trigger, but stood watch while a family was destroyed. The lesson is brutal. The uniform doesn't make someone a hero. It just gives them power. What they do with that power is where the truth lies. If you watched all the way to the end, tell me in the comments, which case disturbed you the most? And do you think any of them deserved a different sentence? If you want more deep dive true crime and military cases like this, hit like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next episode. Thanks for watching. Stay aware. And remember, sometimes the scariest enemies aren't on the other side of the battlefield. They're standing right beside you.